I'm Chris Farrell, and this is OnWatch. Welcome to a special Christmas edition of OnWatch, where today we're going to talk about the ongoing Mueller investigation. I use the word investigation loosely, or for lack of a better term. But in particular, I want to pay attention to one of the characters involved in this sort of spreading scandal, where the investigation now is the subject of people's inquiries. They've become the story. They're the problem, not anything they're actually uncovering with respect to the so-called Russia hysteria collusion nonsense. I've already talked about that before in previous editions of OnWatch. But today, let's talk about a guy in the Justice Department who was kind of dual-hatted. For a while, I think he was referred to as a Deputy Assistant Attorney General, and he held another position having to do with organized crime drug enforcement task forces, plural. And that guy's name is Bruce Ohr, O-H-R. Ohr is a very interesting character. He's a career Justice Department official. Judicial Watch, in fact, has experience dealing with Mr. Ohr going back probably something like 15 years ago. That's a separate topic that we can cover another day. But Ohr's a career justice guy. We know of him. We've had dealings with him. But most interesting is Mr. Ohr's position within the Justice Department, and then also his wife, his spouse's position at, of all places, Fusion GPS. Everyone knows what that is. That's some people call it opposition research. I call it opposition manufacturing, because they make stuff up, right? They don't go out and research facts. They generate their own phony stories. And in this case, we're talking about the so-called dossier, the Steele dossier, that was developed to smear, or to attempt to smear, President Trump and his associates. So Bruce Ohr's wife, Nellie Ohr, is an employee of Fusion GPS, this Oppo research phony up story operation. Their fake dossier is used to leverage getting FISA warrants against President Trump and his inner circle. This is really an attempt to undermine a lawfully elected president, right? They're trying to undo an election. It's a hair's breadth away from being a coup. My colleague, Tom Fitton, made reference to or drew the comparison between the actions and activities of the FBI in hindsight with those of what the Soviets used to call the sword and shield of the party, which was the KGB. And here we have the FBI used as the sword and shield of the establishment, right? And so some people purportedly to be journalists and others in the news media interest, got a case of the vapors. You thought that they would pass out, that Tom rightly would draw this comparison between the politicizing of the FBI and the Justice Department with the actions of the KGB. I got a little news for you. He's right on the nose. He's exactly correct. And so kudos to my colleague. He called it like he saw it, and he happens to also be correct. And here's why and how. Let me point a few things out to you. You've got this wildly conflicted character, Bruce Ohr, who's running around the Justice Department working against the Republican nominee and later president-elect Donald Trump. His wife is manufacturing phony dossier information that's being used for leverage to get FISA warrants to act against President Trump. This is home cooking, right? This is literally inside dealing. No one's supposed to know that. Well, Ohr gets himself in trouble and gets demoted out of his Deputy Attorney General position, but he stays as the head of something, it's an acronym, OCDETF, Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Forces, plural. That's the office that coordinates these very complex, very sophisticated investigations and eventually leading to prosecutions of drug cartel stuff, right? Organized crime drug enforcement task forces. Ohr stays in that position as the chief of that office. Talk about the fox in the hen house. This is a crazy story. And at the same time we learn about Ohr operating in that world, Politico breaks a story about something called Operation Cassandra, where very sophisticated, very complex drug trafficking cases related to Hezbollah, that's the militant Shia terrorist group that's backed by Iran, they're essentially surrogates for the Iranian government, where the Obama administration canned or thwarted or stopped OCDEF and other criminal prosecutions of Hezbollah-linked operations in order to appease the Iranians. And Ohr is in the middle of this, or at least appears to be at the intersection of it. And so there's this very politicized conduct by his spouse out of Fusion GPS. He's playing Deputy Attorney General. He's running this OCDEF operation out of Justice Department. The intersection there is not only Obama objectives with respect to Iran and the so-called deal, which is really us, bending over backwards for the Iranians, but then there's these compromises when it comes to prosecutions of narco-terrorism run by Hezbollah. And those of you who are fans of Judicial Watch will go back and remember all the reporting that we've done over the last 6 or 7 years about the narco-terror link on our southern border, particularly in El Paso, Texas, and the involvement of Hezbollah that runs a counterfeiting operation in Juarez, Hezbollah that was involved in these narco-terror operations and schemes. And you'll also remember that Judicial Watch has reported on drug trafficking in the El Paso area, in particular agribusiness, which is kind of, in some instances, the clean or legitimate front end of a lot of this drug trafficking. It's not just drug trafficking, though. It's human smuggling. It's essentially selling children. It's all sort of nightmarish criminal activity. And I know, through my sources, of an OCDEF case, a case that was being built and developed to be certified as an organized crime drug enforcement task force case, in particular right outside of El Paso. And the case is being built and organized. All these different people on a DEA task force are on it. FBI's involved, the US Attorney's involved. They're building the case to have it OCDEF certified, to pour more resources into it, to go after a very hard target. And guess what happened? One day I'm talking to some law enforcement contacts of mine, and their heads are hung low. And I asked them, what's the problem? What's going on? And they said this one target that they were going after, they couldn't do it. The case was shut down. And I was kind of surprised. And I said, well, what do you mean? Why? And the answer I got back from them was, well, it was deemed to be too hard, too tough a case, too hard a target. We couldn't move against them. Friends, that is why OCDEFs were created, to go after hard targets, to go after complex, sophisticated criminal enterprises. And so the notion that these law enforcement guys were telling me they couldn't go after this one case right outside of El Paso, Texas, because it was too hard, that is mind-boggling. Well, ask yourself, if it's an OCDEF case or if it's being proposed as one, who was sitting on top of that? Who shut it down? What is the linkage back to the Hezbollah operation in Juarez? These are a lot of questions that have gone unanswered. When we've reported on them, we've had people from the Department of Justice and other law enforcement agencies either try to diminish or marginalize our reporting by saying, oh no, that isn't the case. Well, let me tell you something. That is the case. And the reason why I know that is because of other investigative activity that we've undertaken over the past couple of years, and where I have sworn law enforcement officers, intelligence officers, people, frankly, on both sides of the border, who've all confirmed the stuff that I've been talking about with you. And the fact that there's this very connected criminal enterprise that has tentacles that reach all the way to Washington, D.C. They have their own bought and paid for lobbyists here. And when they want to shut something down, when they want to put a lid on something, they do it. And so I have many, many questions for Mr. Ohr, particularly with respect to organized crime, drug enforcement task forces, what was and wasn't approved, who were the targets, what cases made it into full operation, which ones were shut down or suppressed, and why. And these are not leaps of logic. One need only look at the Uranium One story, now 7 years old, and the people that sat on that investigation and lied to the American public about it. And when you see the cast of characters, people like Mueller and Comey, Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General, all these other folks who had direct knowledge of what was going on with Uranium One, and they kept a lid on that. Do you think they could keep a lid in a separate matter with respect to this organized crime drug enforcement task force on suppressing an operation outside of El Paso? Of course they could. And based on what I've been told and my knowledge of this case, the people involved, the circumstances, that's exactly what transpired. So I'm not ready yet to assign specific blame or fault or guilt. I have many more questions than I do have answers. But I think it's a very curious intersection of circumstances, timing, and people. When you've got a guy who's in charge of this program at the Department of Justice, when you have the Obama administration and this Operation Cassandra talking about the deliberate suppression of certain terrorist drug trafficking operations in order to appease Hezbollah and the Iranians, when you have the same official's spouse, his wife, working for Fusion GPS, developing a phony dossier that is then abused to obtain FISA warrants, this is some of the murkiest, most foul-smelling, corrupt swamp water we have waded through in a long time. And this requires the attention of committees of Congress. It requires the Attorney General to personally inject himself into this aspect of the case, because this can't go on, right? We cannot have this Mueller team running rogue, going and doing whatever it chooses to do. The only problem is nothing it's accomplished has anything to do with the so-called Russian collusion. That so far has been nothing but smoke and mirrors. No one can tell you, not one person can articulate for you what the criminal predicate is for the Mueller investigation. They can't tell you what crime's been committed. Instead, we're in this Stalinist upside-down scenario where we're going to investigate people until we find a crime. There's no allegation of a crime. No one can tell you what it is. And that's the way it works in this country. We identify a crime, we conduct an investigation, we winnow down who the suspects are, and then we bring a case. We don't keep investigating people until we find something. That is literally Stalinist. And so every day that goes by, the case with Mueller and company gets worse and worse. There's little or nothing for the $7 million. There's this really thin gruel, this really meager set of indictments or cases that have been brought. Nothing substantive with respect to Mr. Trump or his inner circle or anything having to do with the 2016 election. Nothing with respect to tying Russian malfeasance. Really, the question should be, why did the Obama administration sit on the sidelines walking up to the election? They had foreknowledge of all of this. What did they fail to do? You want to go investigate something? Go investigate that. So we've got the case where Agent Strzok is running around texting with his girlfriend about how they want to undermine Mr. Trump. You've got this guy Ohr running OSADEF and acting as Attorney General, with his wife running the Fusion GPS operation as a staffer there. This is bad stuff, folks. This is corruption by definition. It's abuse of process. It's abuse of investigative technique, abuse of discretion on the part of the attorneys and the law enforcement officers involved. This is a serious challenge to our constitutional republic and to a guy who's been lawfully elected as the President of the United States. There are people in places having little temper tantrums because they can't believe that Hillary Clinton lost. Well, she did, and it's more than a year later, so get over it. And Mr. Mueller needs to put up or shut up and fold up his tents and go home. Because so far, all this looks like is a witch hunt. And it's just churning up more and more questions. We need Strzok under oath. We need Ohr under oath. We need McCabe back under oath. These are questions that are not going to go away. And if they want to keep stringing it out, I have a feeling there's going to be more and more dirt coming out on an already compromised FBI and Department of Justice. But fear not, because Judicial Watch will stay on the job. We'll keep doing what we've been doing now for years. We'll keep doing tough investigations with a tremendous investigative team and great litigators bringing cases and bringing some accountability and justice for you. So, as I close out this edition of OnWatch, I want to wish you and your family members and significant others and all folks out there who appreciate and watch and follow our work, I want to wish you a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, and best wishes looking ahead into 2018. I'm Chris Farrell, OnWatch.